Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Angie Fife. I'm the Executive Director at Equitably USA, and it's my great pleasure to be your moderator today for this session of the ICLEI World Congress, Equitably Shaping Our Sustainable Urban Future. We have a wonderful, distinguished panel of presenters today, and before we get started, I wanted to give a few housekeeping items. This session of the ICLEI World Congress will be recorded, as was the opening session, the launch that happened while I was still asleep here in the US. It was recorded and it is available. All recordings will be available at worldcongress.iclei.org. So please do check out our recorded content. We do have interpretation today. We expect that all of our speakers will be presenting in English. However, if you'd like to follow along in Spanish or Portuguese, hover over your screen and look for the globe at the bottom of the screen, which says interpretation, and you can select the channel that works best for you. Do please add your comments and questions in the Q&A chat box. We will allow our speakers to present, and then we will have a robust dialogue at the end of our session today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. Leading off today, we are so privileged to have our host, our World Congress host, the mayor of the city of Malmö. Mayor Hamma is also a member of the ICLEI Global Executive Committee and an ICLEI First Vice President. Following mayor will be our US Mayor, Mayor Bill Peduto from the city of Pittsburgh, followed by Mayor Aitken from the city of Glasgow in Scotland, the host city of COP26 coming up in November. We'll then have a video presentation from Mayor Soto in the Philippines and wrap up with Vancouver Mayor Helps. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over, please, to Mayor Hamma. Welcome.
Thank you, Angie, and hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be able to join you in this important session today, both to share some example of how Malmö is trying to approach this topic, but also to learn and be inspired by colleagues from all over the world. In a way, it seems completely natural that the equitable and people-centered session is the first one in the program. We on the local level have a huge responsibility to ensure that we create and maintain fair societies for all that are inclusive and embrace diversity. This is the mentality that we have based our city development around in Malmö. And Malmö has a long history of working with sustainability. 5 years after the Rio Declaration in '92, we adapted a local Agenda 21 for sustainable development. Since then, we have been working with a strong focus on sustainable city development, energy efficiency, and ambitious environmental and climate goals. The past few years, we have come to work actively with combining climate aspects with the social and economic aspects. In 2010, we launched the Malmö Commission, a local commission inspired of the result of the World Health Organization's Commission for Social Determinants of Health, which looked at what caused differences in health on global and national level to find ways to minimizing the gap within a generation. Therefore, the focus of the Malmö Commission was to look at what caused differences in health within our city at the local level and take action from there. Almost 2,000 people, including researchers, public officials, civil servants, residents of Malmö, businesses, etc., were engaged in the important work of the Malmö Commission. The two overarching recommendations that were made by the Commission for the city were: one, to establish a social investment policy that could reduce inequities in living conditions to make societal system more equitable. Two, to change processes by creating new knowledge alliances and make management more democratic. We have since worked with these recommendations in a number of ways. And when the UN launched the Sustainable Development Goals, Malmö was in 2015 the first city in Sweden to declare that it would incorporate the SDGs into its own city council goals. Today, we are working with different initiatives such as green bonds, social bonds, and we are in the process of taking new long-term city development initiatives where we combine all sustainability aspects. When we are developing new city districts, we are a fast-growing city. And when we develop new city districts, we are including the sustainability aspects from the very beginning. We work with the infrastructure, but we also have to work with regeneration, energy efficiency, and so on in our already existing city districts. And then it's of utmost importance that this is done in a manner that takes the people already living in the areas into consideration. It has to be done so that the investments don't push people out because the rents go skyrocket and so forth. We have some interesting examples that I really hope to be able to show you next year in Malmö when the physical part of the World Congress takes place. I really think that this is a challenge and something that most growing cities have to deal with, and we need to share new smart solutions. So finally, when we aim to build sustainable cities, we have to have a holistic approach. And in a sustainable city, no one could be left behind.
Thank you so much, Mayor Hema. We are so excited to come to Malmö next year. So thank you so much for inviting all of us. I hope that everyone in the Equitably network will be able to join and have the privilege of seeing your wonderful city. A note, actually, Mayor Helps did not relocate to Vancouver. She is the mayor of Victoria, so apologies for that misstatement. It's my pleasure now to welcome Mayor Bill Peduto from the city of Pittsburgh. Mayor Peduto, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Angie, and it's so nice to see so many friends. You know, a few years ago, under different administration in this country, when we talked about climate change, we talked about conspiracy. We talked about areas of this country that would be left behind, areas that helped to build America, where the fossil fuel industry was established, and in areas that became industrialized because of it. Today, when we speak about climate change, we speak about opportunity. We speak about jobs and the opportunity for those areas not to be left behind, but to lead. Pittsburgh is one of those areas. We sit in the Northern Appalachia, an area of this country where coal was discovered, our land was mined, oil, we sit on natural gas. But we understand that our future is not wed to our past. We understand that as the world is moving toward renewable energy, Pittsburgh and our neighbors need to be a part of that economic push. So we gathered together the mayors of Huntington, West Virginia, Morgantown, West Virginia, Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati, and Youngstown, Ohio, and the mayor of Louisville, Kentucky, the partners of the Ohio Valley, the industrialized heartland of the United States. And we worked together with the University of Pittsburgh and the University of Massachusetts Amherst to create a plan, an economic development strategy that would allow us to be able to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, but at that same time, not be left behind. Because environmental justice also means social justice and economic justice. And a one-size-fits-all solution for any country will not work in those areas that have been dependent upon fossil fuel. The Marshall Plan for Middle America is an economic development strategy that will reverse a 100,000 person job loss, the decimation of communities, into a gain of 400,000 jobs in the rebuilding of our region. It is the way for us to meet our requirements and our obligations of the Paris Agreement, but by doing so in a way that will benefit our region, sustain our communities, and take care of our people. In short, it's an environmental strategy cloaked in an economic development strategy, a way for the people who have led through the second and the third industrial revolutions to be a part of that fourth industrial revolution. In 2016, during a presidential campaign, my party, the Democrats, failed to be able to listen to the people in the heartland of America. We promised them that we'd train them to become coders, that they would be a part of a new economy that was not based upon the history of making things, of being that critical part. Today, we have that opportunity to right that wrong, to provide a future and a hope to the miner, to the person working in the natural gas industry, to the person who has worked in the fossil fuel industry, that their skills are directly transferable to the renewable energy revolution, and that this world is moving in one direction, and that we can either be a part of it or be left behind. The Marshall Plan for Middle America provides that hope that all Americans will benefit from the transference to clean technology and renewable energy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor Peduto. We really appreciate your work, and we were listening at Equitably. We are listening. We are a big tent organization. One of the great pleasures that I have as the director of the Equitably USA office is to work with Mayor Peduto as a member of our board, and also to see each day I receive a feed, a Salesforce feed in the morning, first thing that I look at that shows the activity across the country the day before. All of our technical advisors and network coordinators who have been speaking with communities across the United States. It's always very inspiring to see work happening in Fishers, Indiana, and Oberlin, Ohio, and communities across the nation, not just the megacities, not just the coastal cities. And we really appreciate your leadership. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, we will move on to Glasgow. Joining us now is the leader of the Glasgow City Council in the United Kingdom, Susan Aitken. Welcome.
Good afternoon from Scotland. Thank you to Equitably. It's a pleasure again to join other great global city leaders at events like this. Each of us is committed to championing the critical role of cities within the climate agenda. And cities, of course, are where both the greatest challenges, but also the greatest gains for carbon reduction lie, and also where we have the greatest opportunities for social and economic renewal demanded, both for a just transition to net zero carbon, but also COVID recovery now as well. One of Glasgow's central themes on our road to COP26 has been how our city's past continues to shape our present, and how our journey from being a titan of the industrial age to the devastation of post-industrialization, and now our re-emergence into a low carbon and innovation and culture-led focus now and for the future, makes us an ideal host for COP26. The effect of the decline of heavy industry on Glasgow wasn't just physical. The deep scars of its legacy continue to have a profound impact on the health and well-being of our citizens and communities. And Glasgow's history tells every city, as we stand on the cusp of another social and economic transformation, that we must ensure this time that we bring all of our people on that journey. And in all of our cities, climate change poses that disproportionate threat to our youngest citizens and our poorest communities. Those who contribute least to greenhouse gas emissions are also always the least able to prepare, respond, and recover from its impacts. And that challenge, of course, has now been exacerbated by the impact of COVID. But as our responses to the pandemic accelerate real and fundamental change in our cities, and at pace as well, we also have an opportunity to target those deep-rooted social and economic inequalities. So what are we doing here in Glasgow? I'm going to pick on a couple of particular examples because they illustrate the interconnectedness of this policy agenda and how social and economic equity runs through that, but also because they address the themes and challenges around responding to the climate emergency that I hear regularly, not just from participants at events like these, but also from ordinary Glaswegians here in my own city. So buildings, first of all, how we heat and cool our homes is going to be absolutely pivotal in reaching our net zero targets. In Glasgow, in our context at least, this single area of focus arguably has the greatest potential to help us reach our longer term net zero targets. Conversations about how we source the many billions of pounds that we're going to need to fund the retrofitting of really all but the most modern properties in the city are underway. And we are working closely with the University of Glasgow and other partners on the technological requirements that are going to be required to adapt the tens of thousands of century-old apartment blocks that are home to a great many citizens in Glasgow and which really are emblematic of the look and feel of our city. But this is also an opportunity to create skills, jobs, opportunities in a modern low-carbon economy. In the months ahead, we'll be pressing ahead with partners, including our educational institutions, to identify the wider skills and training needs for this huge programme of adaptation work and how we create the pathways for all of our citizens, and particularly our most disadvantaged citizens, to take advantage of the opportunities that will create. The construction sector is going to be absolutely critical within that, but the City Council family that I lead will also help to lead the way with training and apprenticeships. And by making our homes warmer and more energy efficient, we also address our citizens' cost of living, and in particular energy poverty, one of the most widespread and damaging social injustices in Scotland, a country which often has cold and harsh winters. Similarly, transport. It's the other major contributor to emissions in Glasgow. It's also one of the biggest challenges to and enablers of social equity. Glasgow's core as a city remains largely as it was designed in the late 1800s. It's grid-like many North American cities, and it's too long been given over to private cars. Congestion and pollution levels have long been a major public health issue, and that's particularly unjust because we have, as a city, the lowest car ownership levels in the UK. So we're now redesigning our streets to give priority to people for walking, cycling and wheeling, making them healthier, more attractive, delivering on mobility justice, connectivity justice. The need for safe physical distancing as we emerge from the COVID lockdown has accelerated this work with temporary measures put in place all across the city, but the longer term redesign and reprioritisation of our streets is fully funded and is well underway. Combine that with our advancing plans, both for a new metro system and for greatly improving our bus network. Buses are the most used form of public transport in Glasgow. Better connecting poorly served communities to employment, to learning, to social opportunities. With all of that, we're not just adapting to and mitigating climate change in the city, we're also helping to transform the lives of residents and communities who need it most. I think one of my proudest achievements in my 4 years almost as the leader of the City of Glasgow has been the adoption by the LGMA through the auspices of Equitably of the 7th pillar in its roadmap towards COP26. And that's the twin goals of climate justice and social equity. Ultimately, the most critical responsibility that I have as leader of the COP26 host city is to the people that I was elected to serve, to ensure that the ambitions and aspirations of COP are relevant to their everyday lives and challenges, and to deliver that COP26 cannot just be about bilateral pledges and policies, crucial though they are for the future of our planet. It also needs to be about the practical actions that we are taking as cities, as communities, as municipalities, and as leaders to secure a safer, fairer and more equitable future for all of our citizens. And I look forward to discussing all of this in more detail, I hope with many of you in person at COP26 in Mar City in November. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We look forward to that dialogue, and thank you for these very concrete examples of the work that you're doing in Glasgow and how you're connecting it with your very ambitious goals around climate justice and climate equity. Appreciate you joining us today. We now have a video intervention from Mayor Soto in the Philippines.
Greetings to the mayors and other city officials present. Of course, thank you to the ICLEI local governments for sustainability, particularly the World Secretariat, and to the Southeast Asia and Philippines offices for our continuous and fruitful partnership on local climate action. Local governments are in a unique and strategic position in tackling climate change. We are in the best position to support communities, mobilize resources, and engage our citizens for transformative change. We recognize that in order to be truly effective, we should be ambitious and inclusive. While the local government may play an important part as duty bearers and as primary drivers of climate action, part of our responsibility is to provide an empowering environment in which all stakeholders, industry, commerce, civil society, and ultimately each and every citizen can participate. In line with this, the City of Pasig has embarked on 3 major projects that have heavily relied on citizen engagement. First, Pasig City is a member of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. Inspired by the Seoul Metropolitan Government, we launched our ambitious City Promises project as one way to promote inclusive and participatory local climate action. Our City Promise, which we call the Promise of Pasig, was done after consultations with various institutions, civil society organizations, the academe, and the business sector. Our ambitious goal is a 20% reduction from the city's 2017 level of GHG emissions by the year 2030. We will continue to operationalize this through city-led programs and projects, and we are currently reviewing our local climate change action plan to ensure that climate change actions are integrated into the city's planning and budgeting. We have also launched the Eco-Pledge platform that serves as a tool to increase public awareness on climate action, while at the same time soliciting stronger commitments from Pasigueños by encouraging them to identify tangible ways that they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions as individuals and as families. The Eco-Pledge pertains to a range of commitments on energy consumption, low-carbon mobility, and sustainable solid waste management efforts. Collectively, these will make a large impact and move us towards our vision of a low-emission society. Second, in 2019, we started another project with ICLEI called Accelerate, a very clever, albeit a bit long acronym, which stands for Active City Community Engagement to leverage emissions reduction through activities that transform energy use. We will develop energy advocates from the city's technical staff and officials of barangays or village-level officials. We aim to provide practical assistance to residents and to small to medium-sized business owners to increase energy efficiency in a pilot 250 households and commercial establishments. Third, our city has hosted or partnered to conduct various hackathons, including 2 climathons in the Philippines, with a third one slated for October of this year. Here, participants from the public and private sectors come together to ideate, design, and pitch proposed solutions to identified climate challenges. The winners are now prototyping their proposals. One team is currently pilot testing their program designed for the upcycling of plastics and the integration of waste segregation in small communal stores in Barangay Pineda. The 3 examples I have mentioned not only show the people's readiness for change, but demonstrate their willingness to participate and contribute towards stronger climate action if and when they have the opportunities to do so. We've seen this in practice, even in areas where citizen participation has in the past not been the strongest, such as in our work to improve policies and legislation. One such example was the adoption of an already existing community practice of urban gardening formally into local legislation, resulting into the Integrated Urban Agriculture Ordinance of Pasig City. In the Philippines, we have this much vaunted tradition of bayanihan, which refers to the spirit of community, work, cooperation to achieve a shared goal. It is one of the oldest and most traditional aspects of Filipino society. Today, as we recognize the importance of participatory governance as a practice of good governance, let us embrace the spirit of bayanihan as local governments include and empower every citizen, knowing that this will result in more innovation, strengthened cooperation, and more effective implementation of best practices in local climate action. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing our partnership with Equitably and its partner cities. May we move forward together towards a more sustainable urban future.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor Soto, for that video message. We appreciate you sharing your ambitions with us. Congratulations on remembering that long acronym, and for your work with the Global Covenant here at Equitably USA. One of our very high priorities for this year is to work with the Global Covenant to create an energy access and energy justice pillar for US cities. So we look forward to sharing that out with others in the network. And now I'd like to turn to Bogotá. Secretary Carolina Vásquez is the Environment Secretary at the city of Bogotá, Colombia, and will share with us her vision for safe, sustainable transport for all. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you here today and to be in such great company. So thank you very much for the invitation. Sustainable transport has been a priority for Bogotá over a great many years. And I think that has been one of the keys in terms of having that sustained investment and interest in sustainable transport. Like many other Latin American cities, our transport systems have been slow, and particularly Bogotá, we were very late in getting a metro system. So we've had our challenges in terms of incorporating sustainability into our transport system and our mobility system in the city. But we have had sustained investment in bicycles. We have the largest bicycle system in Latin America, and we see that as a great advantage as we face the climate crisis and other challenges such as the one brought about by the COVID-19 2020 and everything that has happened over the past year. So Bogotá sees transport as a motor for social and economic inclusion. And this is one of the reasons we have persistently invested in public transport through our bus rapid transit system and the largest bicycle road system in the region. But as we evolve to face the challenges of air quality, the climate crisis, and of course, what we have learned throughout the global pandemic, we have also enforced our belief in the importance of having a deeper understanding as to the differential patterns in transport for different groups in our population in order to truly and honestly address the access gaps for high quality transport and mobility in the city. We have focused over the past year on a few different things. The first one is costs. A study to be completed later this year will allow the city to improve its focalization of subsidies and benefits in order to reduce the costs of transport for the most vulnerable segments of the population, who may have to invest around 20% of their income on public transport. The second is safety, in particular, for example, for the elderly population. Improving our education and pedagogic efforts to teach all our transport system to address the safety of our elderly population in our transit system. Employability, we have been prioritizing since last year women in order to hire more women in our public transport system, particularly as drivers, as we have found in international studies that women drivers tend to drive more safely and sustainably. and of course, in employing women as mechanics for the maintenance of our system. Of course, electrification is a huge commitment of the city. All our purchases of new buses will be non-fossil fueled by 2025. And as many other Latin American cities, we are having quite a challenge, but facing very intensely our efforts to have spaces free of harassment for women in our public transport system. First, through an app where we can report harassment directly while we are on the system, and of course, making our reports, police reports, a lot easier to make for women within the transport system itself. And a sixth issue that we have been working hard on is on security for our bicycle system. We have bicycle lanes, which I will expand upon in a minute, but we also need better parking in terms to ensure that bicycles are safe for the city. This question about how to achieve equitable and people-centered low carbon transport is the question that we have been building our sustainable transport efforts around. Low carbon is something I'm very optimistic about. Electrification seems to be a great certainty as technology progresses and is cheaper and more effective every year. Air quality and environmental justice, however, seem to be a little harder to address. As the older buses that have not been electrified or don't have cleaner technologies move to the poorer areas of the city, we must find a way to improve our air quality, particularly in the south of Bogotá, where we have our worst air quality situation, and to ensure that we don't simply expand the problem to the poorer areas of the city. Cable systems have been an enormous improvement for many citizens of Bogotá, as those who settled on the mountainous areas have had the hardest time to access public transport, and cable systems already in place have changed reality for many of these people, and this administration is committed to building at least 2 more of these cable systems to get those who live in the mountainous areas of the city to our public transport system. Air quality within the cable system has improved considerably. Exposure in the cable systems is about 40% better than that of regular buses. So we see environmental advantages as well as social inclusion as a result of these cable systems. In addition to the cable system, other key projects that have been especially underscored throughout the COVID-19 pandemic are our bike lanes. Throughout 2020, we installed 84 kilometers of temporary bike lanes across the city and included 28 kilometers of new permanent bike lanes in the city. We've had over 18 million citizens using our bike lanes during rush hour throughout the past year. And bike lanes on the road have also been built on a permanent manner and have been in our over 37 kilometers of these bike lanes that truly have been an advantage in terms of health and sustainability over the past year. But of course, logistics and freight and cargo transport are 2 of the issues that are still a big part of the air quality and climate crisis and greenhouse gas emission challenges for the city that have been harder to face as they tend to be more complex. As a result, Bogotá joined Ecologistics in 2019 as a means to address the complex challenges of logistics from a multi-sectoral focus. Around 13 to 14% of the particulate matter emitted in Bogotá comes from the freight sector. So this is a group that we really have to work on. We have formed a local work group to work on a low carbon urban logistics plan to offer clear strategies for a transition for this sector, starting from 7 key issues: low or zero emission alternatives within the logistical system, safer vehicles. As the city grows, we see more motorcycles and other vehicles that tend to be unsafe. Urban logistics fully incorporated into our land use plan. Right now we're working on our new land use plan, which will focus on having logistics for clean air and, of course, for climate change. Consolidation strategies through technology and open information. Efficiency as a priority. Efficiency will only be achieved as we have more open information on the logistical needs of the city. And of course, frameworks for more sustainable businesses to be recognized and to have alternatives and advantages, and a full conviction in the future of environmentally sustainable logistics as a pillar for the city. Road safety has also been very important for the city. We have seen a steady decrease in deaths within our transport system. That have been considerable over the past few years, but any lives that we lose are always a big concern for the city. So these are some of the issues that we've been working on to incorporate and close the gaps for our population. And we look forward to working with many other cities in discovering new alternatives as we face this joint crisis with the pandemic, the climate crisis, and of course, the pervading issues of inequality.
Thank you so much, Secretary Vásquez, and congratulations on the durability of some of the policies that you put in place for COVID. Seeing those as long-lasting is really inspiring. Thank you so much for joining us. So we have our final presentation, and then we'll move into Q&A. So please do put your questions into the Q&A box, and it looks like we'll have plenty of time to have a nice discussion. So we welcome now Lisa Helps, Mayor, City of Victoria, Canada. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm here in Victoria. The sun is just coming up behind me. In Canada, before we begin any public addresses, we usually begin with an acknowledgement of the Aboriginal or Indigenous homelands. And so the City of Victoria is located on the homelands of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. It's been really wonderful to be part of this panel, and it's wonderful to go last because I get to hear about all of these incredible initiatives that are happening around the world in cities. And I'm going to talk about the title of the session, or the section rather, is We're All in This Together, Strengthening Community Cohesion Through Constructive Dialogue. So what I'm not going to do is list all of the things that we're working on with respect to climate change and climate action. There are many, and I'm very happy to talk about those once we get to the Q&A. But one of the things that's happening in Victoria, and I know from reading the news in cities around the world, is an increasing sense of polarization and exclusion. And that's exactly why we need to build sustainable, inclusive economies and communities, even while we're tackling climate change, and as a way of tackling climate change. And certainly we are doing that in the city. COVID-19 hasn't slowed us down in terms of the climate action that we're taking. We have a very robust climate leadership plan, a zero waste strategy, a go mobility strategy. And again, I'm happy to talk about those in the question and answer period. But one of the things that we found through COVID is this notion of constructive dialogue, or what, and I'm going to flash a book here, what Adam Kahane calls in this book, Solving Tough Problems. I highly recommend it. What he calls regenerative dialogue. And in Victoria, there are two major challenges facing us right now as part of COVID that aren't directly related to climate change, but we know that if we don't build a cohesive community that is inclusive, that we're going to have more difficulty tackling all of the challenges related to climate change, sustainability, and resilience. And so two of the ways that we're really engaging right now, people who have been left out, who've been disproportionately impacted by COVID, who, if you ask them, you know, what are your thoughts about climate change? In one instance, they would say, I don't care, I just want a house. And in another instance, they would say, I don't care, I just want a job. So this is a little bit embarrassing to admit, but it's the reality. You probably think of Canada as a first world country with good policies that take care of everyone. But one of the things we've seen in cities across the country during COVID is many people living outside in tents, in parks, because they've either were homeless before the pandemic or have become homeless because of the pandemic. And again, this notion of building inclusive communities through constructive dialogue, rather than just shoving people into homes or into shelters, we've begun a process of engaging people who are living in the parks, who are living in tents, and asking them, what do you need to be successful in your housing? Now, this may seem very tangential in terms of how it's related to climate change, but we know that if we build into our way of doing business as a city that includes the most marginalized people when they are indeed most marginalized, that we're going to build those relationships of trust. We're going to build those relationships that we can count on to, okay, so once these people are housed, what kind of housing do they need? What kinds of, and Mayor Aitken talked about this, low energy solutions do they need in the housing that they're moving into? How can we reduce energy poverty? So even though it is terrible to be having a homelessness crisis, engaging people where they're at in a very deep and meaningful way helps to bring them from homelessness into housing, but then again allows the city to build a relationship that will continue to help with again getting these folks and all of the people who support them to care about climate change, climate action, and to be included, to feel included in the city that we're building. Secondly, a very different example, but we've all been faced over the past year and many years before that, for those who are people of color, with racism, and the Black Lives Matter movement brought all of that to the fore. And again, how is that related to climate action and climate change and building sustainable communities? I think if we don't look at racism, if we don't confront it, if we don't listen to the voices of those who have been left out of conversations, whether it's about climate change, of those who have been left out of jobs, because again, Canada is a country of newcomers. Victoria is, it's changing. We are seeing more people moving here from around the world, which we welcome. But in Victoria, during COVID-19, Black people, people of color, and Indigenous people have been disproportionately impacted economically and otherwise through the pandemic. And so one of the, again, constructive, or and I'll recommend it again, Adam Kahane says, this notion of regenerative dialogue. We've created a Welcoming Cities task force to look at how can we make Victoria more inclusive, less racist, and more welcoming. And the task force is populated by Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, and they're telling us what it is they need to have successful integration in the city of Victoria, to get jobs or to get training that's needed for jobs. We're working with the Chamber of Commerce, the Downtown Victoria Business Association, and others to make sure that there is not economic marginalization that's based on racism, and that again, people feel that they are part of the community. So I know that seems a bit tangential to some of the things that others have talked about, but the final point that I want to make is climate change is the most complex challenge that we have facing us. Cities are poised to meet the challenge, and we've heard that this morning, this afternoon, this evening from others. And we will not be able to do it unless those who are most marginalized in our cities, in our communities, feel that they're part of the community that's making these decisions and that's giving guidance to city governments, not only on issues of climate change, but on issues that most impact them. So if we don't have cohesive, inclusive communities, we're not going to have resilience, we're not going to be able to be sustainable, and we won't be able to tackle the very real crisis of climate change. So I'll leave it at that. I do want to be asked some questions about what we are doing in the city specifically with respect to climate change, but I really wanted to take the opportunity to highlight the importance of cohesion and inclusion if we're going to solve wicked and complex challenges. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mayor Helps. Appreciate that. And I would be remiss in not saying that I join you from the land of the Sioux, the Arapaho, and the Southern Ute. So thank you for mentioning the First Nations in Canada. We very much appreciate your focus there. All right, so it's time to turn to our audience. We have about 10 minutes of dialogue, and we have some questions in the Q&A box, so thank you so much for submitting those. We will reshare the book title and author that Mayor Helps just shared with us. There was a request for that. Let's talk a little bit about intergenerational equity. There was a question about elders and how to get elders involved in this work. We know that youth are quite active, which is incredibly important and necessary. Can any of you speak to how you are engaging the elders in your community? Maybe we begin with Mayor Hema. Do you have an example from Malmo?
I don't know whether I have, just according to the discussion about like energy efficiency and the climate work, but we have different themes where we organize both young and elderly people. And not quite recently, actually, we decided to work to create a form of housing involving both students and elderly. And we have some experiences of working with, like, helping out with new technology and so during the pandemics. If that's an answer to the question, I don't really know whether that was the question or not.
Yes, thank you so much. We also have a question about youth and bridging the gap between youth and leadership. Do any of you have examples of how you're bringing youth along to mentor and bring them into leadership positions according to your climate plans or otherwise?
I can fit into that briefly. We have, of course, a youth council, and when we approve public policies in the cities, we have to go through specific population tables with representatives, both of certain. It's harder to get participation on the elderly, and I think that raises a very interesting question on how we can address the elderly successfully. But in terms of youth, the mayor is working with C40 on having a youth climate, two climate youth forums this year. But I have in my work, in my daily work as an environmental authority in the city, I have seen that we are facing this challenge in terms of how environmental licensing and authorizations have worked in the past, and the stress that the climate crisis is putting on these things, because environmental management is going to have like a completely new outlook, a completely new focus in terms to connect with youth and their leadership, particularly in urban settings where conservation, even though youth movements are aiming towards very radical decarbonization and halting every intervention on trees in the cities, it's very hard for the sort of legal frameworks of the past to match the challenges that youth organizations and leaders are posing for the city. And I think this is one of the greatest questions that participation at the urban level is going to face over the next few years. How to have those conversations. And I think several of the panelists spoke to this issue of having, more relevant and more honest conversations, not only as to climate, but every aspect of urban growth and development over the next few years, and how the frameworks that we have worked with in the past are not necessarily going to work for the future.
Thank you for that intervention. Since we have Glasgow on the call today, I think we can tee up a couple of questions specific to COP26. There was a question in the chat asking the leaders here on the call to share their expectations for outcomes from COP26 that can empower cities who care to commit to equitable development within their communities. So maybe you could talk specifically from your perspective, what sort of outcomes at COP26 would you like to see around the issues of climate justice and climate equity? Maybe we will allow Mayor Helps to start us, please.
Thank you. Well, I think, and we've seen this here again this morning, afternoon, evening, that all the solutions that are out there, or all the solutions that are needed are already out there. So what I'd like to see coming out of COP26 is commitments with respect to climate justice, with respect to climate equity, and with respect to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think, again, international measures are a very difficult thing because cities are unique creatures. But I think if COP produces commitments that we can make, and very, very concrete, tangible ways. I will go back to my city and I will do these three things to deliver these three concrete results. I think the days of talking and just written commitments are long gone. And you know, the COP that's coming up this November, it's an opportunity to take everything we've learned in COVID, how quickly we can actually move and make those commitments to climate equity, climate justice, and the actions that we're going to go back to our cities and to take. So I guess my short answer is I'm looking for action orientation.
Susan, would you like to come in?
Yeah, and I would agree with everything the Mayor Help said there. Absolutely. If there's one thing I would add to it, to get really practical, it's finance. I think that those actions need to be financed, and cities can't be put in the position. Cities are the leaders in this, but nation states require cities to be the leader. Nation states and national leaders are not going to fulfill the commitments that they're making to their electorates without cities leading. But cities' own populations and own citizens can't be expected to bear the cost of decarbonising within cities. So there has to be both a national and, crucially, an international effort, which ensures not just that there is equity in financing across countries and between the global north and the global south, for example, and that there is that streams of financing reach the nations who require it most, but also that the places that are required to be in the lead, that require to decarbonise quickest, if we're going to be reaching some of those targets, are actually enabled to do so, and that their residents don't suffer as a result. So that means nation states not only signing up to the kinds of very ambitious targets that we need to see, but also putting their money where their mouth is, devolving that money down to cities and to municipalities to actually spend and deliver on the ground, and also engaging international finance. You know, often municipalities don't necessarily have the capacity to deal at that level, but nation states do, and so they need to engage international finance, whether it's the World Bank, whether it's the big pension funds across the world. If they're to get them to commit, if they're serious about a green agenda, about delivering on sustainability, about addressing the climate emergency, they also need to direct the resource that they're going to invest in that to the right place. And first and foremost, that is going to have to be cities. We're going to have to front load investment in cities over the next decade and do it fast if we're going to deliver those practical actions that Mayor Helps was absolutely correctly talking about.
Great, thank you. Yes, of course, finance and how do we pay for these implementation strategies is certainly on top of mind for all communities, large and small. There were a couple of questions in the Q&A specifically about that. I'd like to turn to your own spending. Of course, all cities have procurement policies and an opportunity to bring in sustainable procurement and equity into their procurement as a municipality. Would any of you like to comment on any strategies that you've used around procurement for equitable and people-centric development? Maybe on the transport side?
I mean, yeah, I'm happy to come in that. We're in Glasgow looking very closely just now at what we call a community wealth building strategy, whereby we use our own procurement, not just as a city, but not just as a council, but our partners in the city, like our universities, our National Health Service in the city, and also some of our big private sector players, to ensure that we can collectively use our very considerable buying power across the city to drive forward a number of objectives. Sustainability is absolutely up there, but alongside it, what we call the fair work agenda. So it is jobs that are of high quality, that are sustainable, that are secure, that pay at the very least the Glasgow living wage as we define it, which is higher than the UK's UK government's minimum wage. So there's an agenda around that we're working on very closely just now. I think we can do it as a council and are already doing it as a council, but that only takes us so far. If we can get all of the big institutions in a city, and Glasgow's a sort of medium-sized city, I suppose, in global terms, but in Scottish terms, we're very big. If we can harness all of that public sector and also some of our private sector buying power, then I think we can definitely drive change, particularly when in a period just now there's a lot of development and a lot of building going on in the city. So we need to grasp that opportunity to make sure that we're not investing all this money in new buildings and new places and not then getting a clear and tangible benefit for our citizens at the end of it.
Thank you so much. So we'll wrap up. We have just 3 minutes left. I want to thank all of our panelists. Mayor Peduto had to leave us a little bit early. I'm sorry we couldn't get the question to Mayor Peduto, and there were a number of questions we didn't have a chance to answer, but we look forward to following up with you offline. Certainly, through this pathway, local and regional governments pursue processes and patterns that support inclusive development for all and that safeguard the natural support systems of human life. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. I want to thank all of you who attended today's session. If you missed this morning's session, you can watch it. It's recording on demand. That's available to you again at worldcongress.icly.org. You're invited to join our upcoming sessions, the virtual launch with a focus on our ICLY Sustainable Development Pathways. Tomorrow we have a high-level discussion on circular development as well as nature-based solutions. Make sure to check out the ICLY World Congress website for information on how to register and attend. Throughout the remainder of 2021, we look forward to exploring a number of critical topics with the ICLY network, and we'll be bringing you a number of those on the road to Malmo. That will kick off on the 28th of May and continue to the Malmo Summit, which will happen in Sweden, May 11th through 13th of next year, 2022. So we look forward to seeing you on the next session. Thank you so much for being a part of this discussion today, and take good care.